I've been in Alaska for more than 2 years, and I'm stationed in Fort Wainwright. Every so often, we go to field missions, and where we go is super isolated. Me and a few guys were tasked out to drive down this mountain that we're currently doing our training on, and we replied yes, reluctantly too, because we just want some real food rather than MREs that we have been living off for the past few days. Anyway, while two of the soldiers were ground guiding me, and my battle I'll call Knox, out of the runway, we noticed that it started getting dark, like really fast. Being on that mountain, though, is hardly ever any light, unless it's from the moon. But just to get a general idea, you could see the northern lights pretty easily. As we drive, Knox is telling me that he has to piss really bad, so I tell him to pull over. As he begins to pull over, it just got extremely quiet. I felt as if someone punched me in my gut because I started to get this really strong sense of something is watching me, and I started to get goosebumps. I took it with a grain of salt, though, that maybe it was just the MRE making my stomach hurt and the weather making the hairs on my skin stand. But then I felt paranoid, and I've never felt this way before in the field because I've been here numerous times before. As he walks back to the truck, I see the foliage on my right-hand side fall as if a weight was being forced on it. I tap Knox's shoulder and I tell him to look in my direction, and it was a moose, but it looked oddly skinny and the antlers just didn't look normal. Our eyes got huge and he responded, "What the hell is that thing?" I stammered because I wasn't too sure what it was either. He buckled up and pressed the brake, but we heard help coming from the direction of the moose. My heart dropped and I felt the heat leave my face, and I looked at him asking, "Did you hear that, or was it just me?" He replied, "Bruh, I heard that shit." He laughed nervously and we turned off the truck and shined our headlamps toward the moose's direction. We are 89B, so we carry our standard M4s with us in the vehicle when we're transporting ammo, whether there's anything in the cans or not, just 'cause it's for our safety. Knox and I looked into the cab to just verify that we have our weapons on us, and we did. I jumped out of the cab and we followed with our headlamps still on the moose. We walked close and the word help was getting louder and louder at this point. We got a few more feet closer, but not extremely close to the moose, and the moose just ran back into the woodline, making me and Knox jump. We looked at each other, and we were both probably thinking the same thing. Did that moose just cry for help? I told him that I was getting cold, and he agreed the same, so we paced back to the truck as fast as we could. But as I closed the door, we heard the words help, but louder than it was earlier. I got that gut feeling right after that I heard the words help again, and I looked into the dark woodline, and this time, I swear to you that I saw red eyes. I gulped, and I told him to look at the woodline, but he put the truck in drive, and he just sped off. We talked for a few minutes about the situation, and it was complete silence following right after that. When we got done with the mission, he sped up the mountain to get back to where the rest of the company was, and he just didn't say a word. He sleeps on the cot next to me, and he didn't speak to anyone about the situation. I'm a bit shook from the situation myself, and I always wanted to experience a skinwalker thing, and I'm not too sure if I did or not, but I'm sorry I never went into the woodline if someone did call for help, but I've just heard too many stories and listened to too many podcasts to try it. But what do you guys think that we encountered? I never even thought that a skinwalker would be in Alaska. So I was hunting by myself on this particular morning in some woods that I'd been to many times. I pulled into the park and my spot facing away from the woods. It was about 5:30 in the morning and pitch black, about half an hour before daylight, I think. As I was getting my gear together from the back seat of my truck and with my back to the woods, I could hear something walking the woodline really slowly. I decided to stop and listen and see if I could figure out where it was and what it was. But the problem was that when I stopped moving, so did it. So I went back to loading my rifle. This happened twice more. I was obviously a little nervous about going into the woods at this point because I didn't know what or where this thing was, but I had a rifle and a revolver on my hip, so I figured that I should be fine. I walked a few feet into the tree line and looked around, and nothing was there. So I made the 5-minute slow walk into the pitch black with no flashlight. As I arrived, I found a big tree and leaned my rifle and backpack against it. I popped up my hunting blind, and as I went over to put the first stake in the ground, something, sounding as if it was just standing directly over top of me, made a snarling growl so deep that it almost vibrated me. And then, this growling grew into a high-pitched scream like a woman. My hair stood on end as I stood up and I turned around with my hand on my revolver, ready to fire at any sound or movement, but when I did, nothing was there. I stood there for a minute, looking into the darkness, trying to make sense of any of this. I figured at this point that it can see me, but I can't see it. It followed me, and if I leave, it may see it as a sign of weakness or retreat and even attack me. So, I grabbed my stuff and I sat, waiting for daylight, and didn't hear or see anything else. Now, people have tried to tell me before that it was a dog, a coyote, or a bear. The problem is that I'm 6'2", even bent over I'm at least 4 foot, and I'm definitely no small guy, and this was towering right over top of me. Plus, when I stood up, I never heard anything move. No leaves, no sticks. There weren't any big trees close by too. Plus, it was smart enough to stop and watch me when I turned around, so I couldn't triangulate where it was, and then even walk around me to come from behind. Someone I know who had a similar story seems to think that it's Indian spirits or something. The area where I live has a lot of Indian history and hieroglyphs all over the area, so that is true, but as for spirits and ghosts, I'm not so sure about that. When I was around 6 years old, my brother and I went to this creepy daycare center in a huge old Victorian house. This was during the late 1980s when stories of child abduction and satanic cults were pretty rampant in the culture and the news. We went to the kindergarten half days because our mother would drop us off and we'd get the bus to and back from school. Our mother would pick us up after she got off work at the local hospital. There was a big playground out back that was fenced off. After getting out of school, the kids from the centre would always play out the back. And at some point, this really strange guy, maybe 20-ish, started coming around and talking to the kids through the fence. He acted weird and spoke in a really funny voice. Not sure if he was actually retarded or just pretending to be, but he would flash his privates at some of the kids and ask them to flash back. Luckily, I only saw this once and I just noped the hell out of there. He creeped most of us out though, and I know we tried to stay away from him. For whatever reason though, the fat grumpy slobs that worked at the daycare never seemed to be around when this creep would show up or believe us when we talked about it. It was a state-run daycare though, so no surprises there. One day after school though, getting off the bus, we and another kid took a shortcut from the bus stop to the daycare, basically just cutting behind some tall bushes on the side of the building to the door. Not really a shortcut, but hey, as little boys, we thought it was cool to travel through the hedge tunnel. But my brother was in the front, and I was in the middle, and a third kid was behind us. And then we heard it. A rustling in the bushes and loud shouting. The person said, "I'm gonna get you." And whipping around, I saw the same creepy guy standing behind us. He started laughing hysterically and grabbed the kid behind us, who immediately started screaming and kicking at him. My brother and I turned around and grabbed our friend by the arms and started pulling him away, sort of playing tug-of-war with this kid. All the while, this guy is slobbering and talking about the things that he wants to do to us. We must have made a racket too, because eventually the guy let go and he took off. We ran inside crying and tried to explain to the daycare ladies, who were just angry at us and said that we were lying or that the guy was only joking. I remember our mother being mad that evening too and yelling at us about taking shortcuts. I don't really remember anything after that. I don't think anyone called the police or we ever saw the dude again, but regardless, it was a pretty scary experience at the time. Kinda hard to share all this because it brings back some pretty bad memories, but I hope that it was of interest. I live in British Columbia, Canada, and every summer my family likes to go out on weekend trips in order to get away and relax. This past summer, we decided to head out to Vancouver Island to explore and visit the beaches. Beautiful place, by the way. So, my family was driving out to the northern tip of Vancouver Island when we came across some road construction. We were in the middle of a heavily forested area, stuck in traffic, waiting for the crews to wave us along. Naturally, I fell asleep in the car too. I woke up in what felt like maybe an hour later, I think, to see that we still weren't moving. I looked to my dad, and his eyes are just fixed on the road, still waiting on the crews to wave us forward. My mum is asleep in the back seat, and my little sister is staring out the window listening to music. I remember thinking at the time that it was just mildly quiet for a construction site. No sounds of machines or heavy equipment, but it didn't seem significant at the time, so I just let it go. My eyes naturally gravitated towards the passenger side window as well, when something caught my eyes. On the side of the road beside a cluster of trees, I see what appeared to be a young girl standing beside a tree, just looking over at us. I would have to guess that she would have been no older than 10 or 11, I'd say. At first, I assumed that it's just a girl from one of the cars lined up behind us, also stuck in traffic, as it wouldn't be too out of the ordinary to assume that a kid just got bored sitting in the car and decided to explore the surrounding woods or something. But what stuck out to me as just very different were the clothes that the girl was wearing. They seemed old, and she was wearing a white sundress with little blue dots and a black headband. Now, again, this was in August, so not too out of the ordinary, I guess. She was just kind of pacing around back and forth in between the trees on the side of the road too, and I realized that I must have looked super weird just looking at this girl, so I decided that I was just overthinking things. That was before she and I made brief eye contact, to which I responded with a smile and a friendly wave. She waved back and also smiled at me, but that was when I noticed another defining feature that really puzzled me. Her eyes. They were completely blue, like her pupils, and what should have been the whites of her eyes were a deep navy blue. I tried to remain as calm as possible and slowly began to look away, as I was completely freaked out at this point. It was then that a boy also emerged from behind one of the trees. He appeared to be a little bit older, maybe 15 or so. He was quite lanky, with freckles on his cheeks, and he was wearing a band t-shirt with jeans or something and Adidas sneakers. The eyes were the same shade of navy blue, and they both began to beckon over to me as if to get me out of the car and join them in the woods. Being pretty creeped out at this point, I looked back at my sister to see if she was seeing this, and as I assumed, she was also staring out of the window, eyes wide in disbelief. I then noticed that she's slowly reaching for the car door, eyes still fixed on the two kids who are now beckoning a little more urgently. And then the looks on their faces go from friendly to impatient and then a little aggressive if I had to put my finger on it. I proceed to shout her name to get her to snap out of whatever trance that she was in. I try to get the attention of my dad beside me, but to my horror, I realize that I can't speak. Like my lips were moving, but no words were coming out of my mouth. I tried shaking my head, but he seemed completely unfazed and kept his eyes glued to the road. My sister also tried shaking my mum awake, but to the same effect. As I'm trying to remain calm, I tell my sister to just close her eyes and count to 20 with me, kind of in sign language. That's something my parents and I used to tell her when she was younger in order to get her to calm down her anxiety. I hadn't done that in years, but I had to do something, right? Together, though, we both closed our eyes and started counting together. When we opened them again, the world just suddenly seemed to come alive again. I could hear the sound of construction workers yelling at each other, as well as the sounds of engines of the other cars surrounding us, and I looked outside, and unsurprisingly, the kids were just gone. I looked over and asked my dad how long we had been in the traffic for, and he said roughly 10 minutes. When we finally got moving again, I wasted no time in telling my parents what I had seen. However, my dad told me that he glanced over at me a couple of times and I was just zoned out, staring out the window apparently. The rest of our vacation went by normal. Nothing out of the ordinary happened and we all had a good time. My sister even seemed to just play it off as a weird dream that we for some reason shared. It was when we got home, though, to the mainland that I started really looking into my experience. I, of course, held on to the possibility that I had just dreamt the whole thing, but I always come back to the fact that my sister and I were both very conscious, or at least had the same experience, and can both recall these little details. I've looked all over the internet and have seen some similar stories of blue-eyed children, but nothing really matching me and my sister's experience. I'm sharing this here to see what everyone else has to say about it. I know it's a little long, but it really does intrigue me, and if nothing else, I'll have a creepy story to tell at campfires or when hanging with friends. The biggest question, though, that still resonates with me to this day is, what would have happened to us if my sister and I had actually gotten out of that car? So this story has been told to me by my mum a few times, in fact, and every single time, I still get that creepy, eerie feeling that someone is watching me. My mum is from a small town in Mexico, and when she was around 14, she had the habit of waking her mum up to go to the restroom since it was an older home and the restroom was located outside. My mum tells me that it was around 3 in the morning when she woke up and felt the need to use the restroom urgently. So she began calling out for her mum, and after a while of her mum not responding, she began getting agitated and started screaming. It was at this point that my mum turns around and, at the foot of her bed, she sees her mum standing there. She was wearing a white robe, but had a very bleak expression on her face, and both of her arms were extended. My mum said that she suddenly felt extremely cold and had a huge sense of dread. She had never seen her mum wear a white robe like this. That's when she looked down and saw her mum's feet weren't touching the floor. At that moment, she screamed and quickly threw the covers over her head. Her mum, wearing something completely different, mind you, runs in to find my mum shaking in her bed. Nobody believed my mum, and everyone told her that it was just a dream. Until a few days later, there was a power outage, and during this, my mum and a few of her siblings, with her parents, all decided to sleep in the living room. At around the same time of 3 a.m., they heard the same undeniable wails down their street, and none of them slept that night. This story happened to me when I was 15, and my family had moved across the country to a town that was much smaller than the one that we had lived in previously. For privacy reasons, I won't name it. Yes, it's that small. But down the street from my high school was this strip of local stores, one being a butcher shop. Upon moving, I hadn't made a ton of friends, and didn't for a pretty long time, in fact. One of my best friends to this day was the one that introduced me to the story of the Meat Man. This was after being friends for a few weeks, and she told me that this meat shop had been accused of mishandling their products or something, and that the owners, husband and wife, were pretty creepy, especially the husband, and hence the name Meat Man. A few weeks passed, and I forgot about what she had told me. I didn't have to pass it on my walk home or anything, so it was never at the front of my mind. But one day, while I was at school, my mum texted me asking if I'd pick up a chuck roast, because she wanted to make her infamous Mississippi roast, and it's actually delicious, and I totally recommend it. So, forgetting about what my friend had told me, I walked to the shop after school. It was pretty small and very cold inside. Upon entering, I was met with the man who ran the shop, or so I assumed. He was probably 6 feet tall and had long grey hair, and he was stocking the front glass container as I walked closer to the front. I had asked him if he had chuck roast, and he smirked at me and said yes. He had asked me what I was using it for, so I vaguely told him about my mum's roast. He said that it sounded good and that he'd love an invitation to dinner sometime. I remember laughing and telling him maybe next time. And this is when it gets weird. He then comes around the container to where I'm standing and tells me that he has a chuck roast in the back. He offers to let me go back with him, but I politely decline. He then told me that if I wanted the roast, that I'd have to go back and get it myself. Now, I may have been young, but I wasn't stupid, so I politely declined again and told him that I needed to be home soon, so I'd appreciate it if he'd just go and get it for me. And what he said next still sends chills down my bones. He goes, "What's to be scared of? You don't think I'm going to do anything back there, do you?" I remember in that moment feeling like I was going to puke. I considered whether or not it was worth it to buy the roast, and I decided that it just wasn't in the end. So I told the man that I wasn't interested in the roast, and I made my way outside. As I was walking down the sidewalk, I looked back, and he was standing outside of his shop, almost smiling, watching me just walk away. I ran home, and I called my mum, just in tears. I was paranoid that entire week as well, that I'd be out and happen to run into him. Luckily, I haven't seen him since, but I sure do wish that I had listened to my friend that time. G'day mates, it's Busta here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you would like to help me out, then please go ahead and watch another video by clicking on a card on the screen. As always guys, thanks for all the love and support, and I'll see you mates in the next one.